arc.exe.
Hello there on this wonderful Halloween evening. Welcome, welcome. Today my co-host Sally will be taking over the story reading. So grab your favorite candy, turn the lights off, get comfy, sit back and relax, and without further ado, let the terror begin. Happy Halloween, everyone. Story number 1, Don't Remember.
When I was about 13, my mom and dad invited round our previous neighbors from the block of flats we lived in until I was 5 years old. Anyway, I'd been sent to bed, but could still hear everyone talking about this and that, until the woman neighbor said, "Hey Dixie's mom, do you remember when Dixie used to complain that there was someone in his room? Well, there's a family that's just moved into the floor above who have a 3-year-old son. He is complaining of the exact same things Dixie did." This creeped me out. I had no recollection of any of this, so the next day asked my mom. Her first reaction was, "You don't remember?" Then she told me all about the weird stuff that used to happen, footsteps up and down the hall, shit going missing and stuff. She said the final thing to happen was when she was listening to a record one day, and it started to slow down, like someone was holding a finger gently on the platter till it finally came to a stop. My mom said she snapped at this point, and started shouting, "Will you leave us the heck alone?" As soon as she said this, the record went straight back to playing normally, and we never experienced anything again. I've never experienced anything like that since, and these days I'm quite skeptical of such stories, but I believe my mom. Strangest thing is how I found out about it, from someone else 10 years later experiencing something so freaky.
Story number 2, No Child Left Behind.
Halloween is right around the corner, and it's the time of the year I dread more than any other, more than the anniversary of my father's death, or when I have to elbow people out of the way for TVs on Black Friday. And it all started a decade ago. I was 25 back then, and the first time I felt too old to go out knocking on my neighbors' doors asking for sweets. I had not long moved out of my parents' house and had found a quiet little house share with 3 other guys. They had all gone to get pissed, while I stayed in doing work that was long overdue. Halloween that year was a typical cheesy 80s movie affair. The wind was howling like a starved wolf and the rain lashed hard. The whole gimmick bored me rigid, so when the first groups of children turned up begging for charity, I promptly shut the door in their faces. Their costumes were profoundly homemade with a bargain supermarket vibe to all of them. Lack of imagination. It was around 10:30 p.m. that I first saw the kid. He couldn't have been any older than 8. He was with 3 other children decked head to toe in flowing black robes with an assortment of Grim Reaper masks adorning their tiny faces. This one lad, however, had gone all out, or more likely his parents had, to terrify. He wore rags so tattered and torn that they could hardly be called clothes. He was barefoot, with his feet scabbed and ripped and covered in congealed blood. His skin had been discolored to give it a putrefied appearance. There was, however, no odor to him. As I fixated upon the boy, I began to realize that none of his companions seemed to notice he was there, nor the spine-chilling gash that ran across his neck, or how his eyes bulged with a permanent sense of horror. Whilst I was clearing away the other kids, this one boy just stood and stared right at me. He made no movement other than to offer a festering right hand to me, presumably for sweets. I finally snapped out of my delirium and slammed the door in his face. That was 10 years ago, and I still remember every rivulet of water running down his face. How he didn't seem to register the burning cold against his ruined skin. How he gave no response when I told him to get the heck off my garden. That night I didn't answer the door to any more disturbers because I sensed that the kid would still be out there. When I went to bed that night, I checked quickly out of my bathroom window, which overhung the front door, to see him standing at the end of my garden, staring into my face, arms still extended. I had woke the following morning to find my property thankfully childless, and I began to put him down to being more of a symptom of my tiring day at work, and slowly my brain deleted him from its cache. That was, until the following October 31st. Fewer trick-or-treaters that year. Just a handful of people barely even trying to spook. Some asking for money and one or two for drugs. It was becoming increasingly clear that Halloween was falling by the wayside in the neighborhood. I, myself, was content to settle myself in my living room. My housemates had all moved out and left me over the last 12 months, with bourbon and a few softcore movies, and fall into a deep sleep, which I was rudely awoken from at 10:30 on the dot. That's not to say that something woke me, but I was definitely jerked out of a potentially nice slumber. I was hit by that fairly common chill that some people get when someone walks over your grave. Every inch of my skin pulsed and stood on end, like a gazelle sensing a predator. Dozily, I wandered into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. While I was refreshing myself over the sink, I made the awful decision to look up and saw a sight which haunts me to this day. The boy from the year before. His face was pressed against my window, completely expressionless, with those wild, bulging eyes locked on me, unfocused. I jumped back, hitting the unit on the other side of the kitchen, giving me a searing pain on the back of my head. All the while, the boy continued to stand there, looking right into my kitchen. He made no movement to try and break the window. In fact, he showed no signs of wanting to hurt me at all. His hand was still outstretched, and the makeup he wore on last year's Halloween still etched his face, though more tatty than then, as though it had decomposed slightly. I slinked up to bed, and the next day, as before, he was gone. I was beginning to think a prank was being played on me. Now, this has happened every Halloween since that day in 2007. This boy has turned up, either on his own, or with a group that doesn't know he's there, and just stares at me. I watched him until 2 a.m. a few years ago, whilst he stood at the bottom of the back garden staring up into my bedroom. I thought about calling the police once or twice, but he showed no signs of aggression, so I don't know how much help they would be. What worries me is how he has not aged once over the last decade.
Story number 3. Just smile and nod.
This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved to a new town. A new friend of mine from school and I made plans to go trick-or-treating together. At the time I remember thinking I was a bit too old to still be trick-or-treating, but who doesn't want free candy? My friend and I figured we still had 1 year of trick-or-treating left in us. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, my parents thought it was fine for us to trick-or-treat together without adult supervision. Everything was going great and we were having fun, getting some solid candy, etc. Then we rang on one guy's doorbell. The porch light was on and there was a pumpkin or two, so we figured the people in the house were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first I was glad because he was dressed in costume and happy to see my friend and me, so I felt we were in for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he handed out, but I do remember what happened next. He asked us to enter into his home, which is weird, but we were 13, so we didn't really think anything of it. Then he asked if he could take our photo. He said he always liked to take photos of the kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes. On one of his walls were a bunch of pictures of different random unrelated children in Halloween costumes. At this point, even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kinda creeped out, but I figured it was best not to upset the man and let him take the picture and then we could leave. So he snaps the photo of us, and then he pulls out a clipboard with a sheet of paper on it with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He says he likes the kids whose pics he snaps to sign their names so he can know who they are. At this point, we were both mega creeped out. We should have just run away, but we were too conditioned not to be rude. I decided to sign a fake name. He looked at the paper, looked back up at me, then down at the paper. Then he repeated the fake name I'd given and nodded. Luckily after that he didn't do anything and we were free to leave, but it definitely creeped us both out. At the time I thought he was just an eccentric guy, but as an adult looking back on the story, it seems much more sinister. I'm so glad nothing bad happened to us, and hope nothing bad happens to any other kids. Halloween, with all these costumed kids trick-or-treating in the dark and minimal parental supervision, could be a great opportunity for predators to get kids alone in their homes with no one knowing the kids' whereabouts. Please stay safe out there, and happy Halloween.